I don't think it's such a crazy idea. I think that the vacuum transport and also the magnetic levitation, they really have a high potential.
Welcome to the panel Hyperloop, the fifth mode of transportation. Julian and I both work in the automotive team at Google, and together with you today, we're leaving our automotive comfort zone to talk about a completely new form of transportation.
Until only a few years ago, IAA was focused on just cars. Look around yourself today, and you can see that IAA is focusing on mobility more holistically. It's therefore just natural for us to also take a look at what the future of mobility might look like. And one contender for that future of mobility is Hyperloop. So in the next 45 minutes, we are going to try to answer the question whether Hyperloop has the potential to become the fifth mode of transportation. There are many reasons why Hyperloop could be joining the ranks of trucks, planes, trains, and ships. And one of those reasons is the open source development. Many companies and university teams are developing solutions.
So today we are proud to welcome 3 members of the 3 leading university teams. Unfortunately, one isn't able to make it due to technical problems and cannot join virtually. But we are very happy to have Iris, Rahel, and Sofia today with us. And together with the 3 experts, we're going to talk about whether or not Hyperloop can actually become the fifth mode of transportation and dive a little bit deeper into different perspectives on the topic today. We're going to talk about the general idea of Hyperloop, followed by looking at the technical feasibility, discussing certain safety aspects, and also ending with an outlook into the economic feasibility today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves to the audience?
So, thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to this panel. My name is Iris Landerer. I'm from Mu0 Hyperloop. We are a student initiative from Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, and I'm responsible for the overall management, and I have built up the association in the last year. And yeah, I'm responsible for the overall strategy. And in my non-Hyperloop life, I'm studying computer science at KRT in my last master's semester.
Hi everyone, my name is Sofia Ramirez. I'm from TUM Hyperloop, and I have been in the team since around 5.5 years. Now I'm have been responsible for cabin systems and also for safety. So everything that has to do with the passengers.
And I'm Rahel Herzog. I'm from Lucerne in Switzerland. I'm part of Swissloop. That's the Hyperloop team from the ETH Zurich. I'm an electrical engineer there. I've been part of Swissloop since last September. I was responsible for the motor and also safety and testing relevant aspects.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction. And let's begin by understanding what Hyperloop is and how it all started. So let me ask you this, Iris. Why do you think Hyperloop is worth pursuing at all?
So basically, imagine you want to travel from Munich to Hamburg, for example. Yeah, then you have a few options. First of all, you can take the car or the train. Both of them are not so fast. They will take about 8 hours approximately. And while the car is not such an environmentally friendly alternative of traveling, while the train is, but it's still very, very slow. On the other hand, you can take the plane, which is quite slow, which is quite fast, about 1 hour. But you also have to take into account that you have to go to the airport, to the security, and then back again to the city. So it will be actually 3 hours or whatever. So this is where the Hyperloop comes into play. The Hyperloop combines the speed of a plane with the energy efficiency of a train. And therefore, it could replace, for example, short-haul flights in the future and might be a very sustainable way of traveling.
Iris, you've mentioned quite a few advantages of the Hyperloop already. help us understand a little bit together today the concept behind Hyperloop.
So basically, a Hyperloop is a very, very fast train which levitates through a tube. The tube is partly evacuated, meaning that there is a very low air resistance in it. And due to this low air resistance, the train or the Hyperloop transport capsule is very, very fast. But not only because of this tube, also because of the levitation, there is no rolling resistance. And that both of them makes the Hyperloop very, very fast. So you can travel with it theoretically with the speed of sound, like 900 to 1,000 kilometers per hour. And besides of that, it's very energy efficient because of the levitation, it's not touching the rail, and you can operate it very, very emission friendly.
It's not a huge secret that Hyperloop is yet another crazy idea from Elon Musk. Can you talk a little bit about the origins of Hyperloop and the idea behind it?
And so essentially, the first ideas of vacuum transport has been in the early beginning of the 20th century. But since then, not so much happened. But in 2013, Elon Musk took up the idea of this vacuum transport and developed it further. And he had released a paper, a Hyperloop paper, and he created this wording Hyperloop. And he also created competitions where teams from all over the world can take part and build prototypes and just work on this technology.
So Elon made the idea public back in 2013, but a lot has happened since. Can you tell us a little bit about what these milestones are and what the status quo is today?
Yeah, so basically I think most people think of, when they hear about Hyperloop, that it's a really, really technology which is far, far away in the future. But it's not the truth, because there is a lot of stuff ongoing right now. For example, back in November 2020, there were the first very successful human passenger tests on Hyperloop. It was from Virgin Hyperloop One, which is a very famous Hyperloop company, and they have a short, full-scale Hyperloop track and a prototype. And in November 2020, they did their first successful test there. It was not so fast. It was only 150 kilometers approximately, but only a few days later, the Korean Railroad Research Institute did a record with their prototype. It was a little prototype, just 3 meters long, but they reached a speed of about 1,000 kilometers per hour, which is definitely a record. And there's also a lot of stuff ongoing. For example, in the Netherlands, there's the UN study, which is a new project which does research in the topic of how Hyperloop stations might look like in the future, how they are integrated in the city or in the infrastructure, something like that. So it's exciting times.
Perfect. Thank you for that general introduction. In contrast to many other modes of transportation that we also see around these fairgrounds today, Hyperloop is being developed open source. There are competitions, there are various teams from companies to universities. So what I'd be interested to hear from all three of you is, what are your thoughts about this development mode of doing it with competitions, open source, universities, companies? What are your thoughts on this mode of development?
Maybe what I think is Hyperloop is it's very hard that just a company built everything. So it's important that other companies, like for example, it was the case for Transrapid, is involved in the whole project, and you take some. Every company that has a different experience that you want to take advantage of and use it also, and it is easier to come far if different companies work together for this. So also in the case of the university, they do investigation on this field and so on. So I think the stakeholders are very important to make the Hyperloop a reality.
Now you guys are representing 3 of the leading university teams in Europe. And how can you talk a little bit about how you are involved or how these student-led teams are involved in the whole process?
Well, so basically, you might be familiar with Formula student teams who take part in competition, who do their cars and take part in competitions. Actually, it's quite similar for the Hyperloop topic. So Elon Musk created these competitions, the SpaceX Hyperloop pod competitions, which took place every year. And so student teams or teams from all over the world just built a prototype within this year and took part in these competitions. And there was a track at SpaceX where all teams could drive their prototypes there. And the SpaceX competitions from Elon Musk are not taking place anymore, but there is another competition, the European Hyperloop Week. A lot of, for example, Swissloop was involved in organizing it all. So so the topic. So it's really a cool experience to take part at these competitions and have the motivation to do some research in it.
Cool. So Iris paved the way today and gave us a brief introduction into Hyperloop and the current status. Let's go a little bit deeper now and learn a little bit more about the technical feasibility of Hyperloop. Rahel, can you explain to us and the audience what kind of prototypes you are currently developing and what framework you are following with your team?
I just want to start with the goals. Why do you want this? We want a safe and reliable system. And of course, it should be also environmentally friendly, energy efficient, and we want to achieve high speeds because at low speeds we already have other modes of transportation. So why should we do that? And then the framework, as Iris said before, we had Elon Musk. He published his white paper. There was the SpaceX competition. And his framework was you just take an aluminum I-beam and you do it just as fast as possible. He originally proposed it to get a faster solution because there was this high-speed rail proposed, and he thought it was not very efficient, it was not too fast, and it was also really, really expensive. So he thought, why not get students involved from all over the world, and let's develop something smarter and better. So that was his aim, and he proposed air bearings for levitation and a compressor at the front. And for propulsion, he said he would use a linear asynchronous motor, but then the student teams, they were free in their development. So the early developments, they were a little bit different, like there were some rocket propulsion systems and different types with compressors. So the goal was really just to be as fast as possible. That was the early implementation of the Hyperloop competition.
What the audience might not know is that there are actually some technical questions where the 3 of you fundamentally disagree on. And the teams that you represent also fundamentally disagree on. We will get to these questions in a little bit. But before we do that, can you talk about what you and your team define as state-of-the-art today? And what are some of the challenges that your team is tackling at the moment?
The state-of-the-art today, and as we saw at the Hyperloop Week in July this year, a lot of teams, they designed those linear asynchronous motors as Elon Musk proposed, because as we have the I-beam, it's just a beam of aluminium, and there we can use a single-sided linear induction motor. And you probably might not know what a linear induction motor is, so you can see it's basically just a rotary motor that is cut and bent straight. So that's basically the principle of a linear asynchronous motor. So a lot of teams do this. But then the challenge is there, it's not very efficient because we have aluminum and it's not magnetic. So the whole concept is not very efficient. So that's a limitation that we're facing, and we need to find better solutions for that.
So you already mentioned just now that you need to, or you are constantly kind of trying to find better solutions for some of these challenges. Can you talk a little bit about what these new ideas or new concepts are, and what you're working on right now?
There's actually a lot of different concepts that different companies and student teams all around the world are developing. I'm just focusing on two. The one that we do and is levitation, as I said, but we have different challenges with levitation, because if we still use the aluminum I-beam, then we will never be efficient. And also, the stability is an issue because we levitate on this beam, and that's just not very efficient. So there's also other ideas, either to develop a new track. Also, you could use permanent magnets, but I won't go into detail here, or MagRail, which is a hybrid solution between a train and actually Hyperloop. And then what Delft Hyperloop does, they designed a whole new track, so they can do a track-sided propulsion, so they don't have to carry around batteries in their pod. But unfortunately, yet it's not possible to levitate with this system. So the goal in future is to bring those two solutions together so that we can levitate and also have a track-sided or just a more efficient propulsion system, so that we don't have to carry around that much batteries.
Okay, very interesting. So the propulsion and the levitation, those are kind of two of the key aspects that you talked about. And they are also some of the aspects where the teams are developing different solutions. And they are developing different solutions for reaching the same goal and achieving the same challenge. And they are not just kind of minor little details that you could disagree on, but they are like fundamental aspects of the technology itself. And you mentioned this a little bit now. One of these aspects is, where is the energy stored? So it can either be in the inside of the pod in the form of a battery, or it can come from the outside, from the track. Can you guys talk a little bit about kind of the pros and cons of these two ways of storing and getting the energy?
Yes, as I mentioned before, when you have track-sided, then obviously your pod can be smaller and lighter. You don't have to carry around the batteries. It's also probably safer because you don't have batteries, because batteries, they can be a safety hazard. So that is easier, and it's also easier to power a track than to power this pod, because it should be in the end levitating, and then you have everything on board. But then, as I said, yet it's not possible to levitate, and levitation is really a great way of transport, because you can be much faster because you don't have friction. And especially when you combine it with an almost vacuum environment, then you have no friction and no air drag. So that would be really a lot more efficient. So we have these two aspects. But I think the most important aspect to remember is that we're all student teams, and our biggest constraints are money and time. Because this SpaceX competition, it was once a year. The European Hyperloop week is once a year. So we have a year to develop a whole new pod each year. And we are students, we don't have money, we have everything needs to be funded. So that's the biggest constraint, and that's why different teams focus on different aspects first. We agree that in the end we want to have an efficient system and we want to levitate, but we're just not there yet.
Okay. So while there might still be some disagreement about propulsion and the technology that will achieve this, there's definitely certain things that I think everybody can agree on, and that is that we need to achieve levitation in some stage. The Hyperloop will have to be fast, and it will have to be very, very safe.
So I'm sure that many of you have already traveled by train or airplane going above 300 kilometers per hour, and most of you probably never had any issue with your health while being in an airplane at that speed. With Hyperloop, we already heard that you can travel above 1,000 kilometers per hour, reaching in the future, hopefully, the speed of sound. So naturally, the question of safety comes to mind. So Sofia, you're working on a safety concept and define what safety means for a completely new mode of transportation. Could you tell us a little bit about how you bring this to life for a completely new concept?
Sure. Oops, just 1 second. Sorry, I just want to go to the slide. Here. So, yeah, first, you need to define the system, right? So you need to know, for example, in the case of Hyperloop, you have a tube, you have a vehicle, like Rahel was saying, like what kind of propulsion system, what kind of levitation system do you have? Once you know the system, you can think about what are all the hazards, what is everything that can go wrong. And this you can do in a quantitative way. So it's actually very interesting because then you can know what is the risk that you have. And if you know the risk, you can also then think what actually should not go wrong. So is the risk tolerable? Is the risk not tolerable? So for example, in the case of fire, you know you need materials inside of the pod that are not flammable. And these are the measures that you need to take, and this is like an iterative process that you need to go and optimize it until you go to the safety concept. And then you have a safety concept of the Hyperloop system, for example. For the Hyperloop, it's very interesting because it's a very new transportation system. So it means actually there are not really norms yet. There are some guidelines. HTT, Hyperloop Transportation Technologies, is also a big company working in this field. They work together with TÜV and they made some guidelines. However, like the word says, they are just guidelines. And these guidelines are based on existing transportation systems like airplanes, aircraft, or railway, because Hyperloop is still somehow in between. For example, it's related to railway because it's a ground transportation system on the other side. Like airplanes, you also have a low pressure when the passengers are inside. Not in the cabin, of course, but in the tube. So, yeah.
You've touched upon what could and should not go wrong, and also the guidelines, and that there are no real or like official rules yet or laws. When you're looking at the current development of Hyperloop and also at the prototypes that you or other university teams are developing, if you're taking the current developments and look into the future and say that could once be a finished Hyperloop setup, would you say to the audience that it's a safe way to travel and you won't feel the 1,000 kilometers per hour on your body?
Yeah, I mean, first, like I mentioned before, you need to define the system. So in order to really know how safe it is. And it depends on the safety concept. For example, for the case of Transrapid, it was very interesting since they have a lot of redundancy. And they could always ensure that they could reach the next emergency exit, even though the propulsion system wouldn't work or the levitation system wouldn't work, because they have a rest velocity. And this was possible. So if we would have a system like this for the Hyperloop, it means that maybe it's not necessary that people evacuate inside of the tube, for example. But there are also some aspects that compared to existing transportation system, for example, the autonomously of the Hyperloop, this gives space so that there are less human error, or that also the Hyperloop is weatherproof because the vehicles inside of a tube. So these are also aspects that you can see in the Hyperloop system that make it probably more secure than other existing ones.
Yes. And you touched upon the air travel as well a little bit in terms of travel for passengers. If we're looking a little bit more now into the security aspects of passengers at the potential future Hyperloop stations, how do you think they will look like, and how do you think a realistic safety concept will look like to avoid potential sabotage like it's today being done at airports?
Yeah, I mean, this is still something we are working on, but in my opinion, it will be more like, for example, for airplanes, like you have these security checks that you go through, and you are sure that there are no, you don't have any materials that, I don't know, explosives or something that can, make some damage.
Thank you.
The question, if I may add to that, or I think the question of putting the tube above or below ground is an interesting one, and it has some implications for safety. Can you guys talk a little bit about the way that you are thinking about the track and this above or below ground question?
I think both has advantages, and I think maybe a combination of it would be quite nice. Now, maybe if you have to, you also could think about integrating the Hyperloop into the highway or something like that. That is above the highway, something like that. And there, of course, it would make sense to do it above because, well, it is integrated in the highway, and you it's just not so cost efficient, costly, and it definitely would make sense to do it above. But at some way, it would also be good to do it underground, something like, for example, if you want to go to the city or something like that, and underground the city. So I guess. I think a mixture of both would be good.
Okay. So this next part, we wanted to take a look at the scalability, and this was actually the part where we were hoping to dial into Delft University and speak to Puk. We still think that it's a very important topic, so we'll try to do our best to talk about this with the three of you. And it's important because we now learned what Hyperloop is, we learned how it works, and we learned a little bit about what we need to make it safe. And these are very important prerequisites, but the technology can only become a new mode of transportation if it's scalable. And that means scalable from both a technological point of view, but also from an economical point of view. And still today, many of the test tracks are only a few 100 meters long. And obviously, for this to become a usable solution, we need to make these tracks a lot longer, and we need to look at full-scale concepts. So can you three talk a little bit about what are the biggest bottlenecks right now for realizing these full-scale concepts?
Yeah, so I think, in my opinion, like Sofia said, one of the biggest issues is, of course, safety, because no one wants to sit in a tube which will be accelerated to speeds of the sounds, maybe underground and in a vacuum. So it's really important that it's safe, that people feel safe when you're sitting in the capsule. Also, a very big issue are the costs, of course, because you need new infrastructure for that, and well, that's always quite costly, and therefore, you might need to search for, do some research on new technologies, how to make it cheaper, for example. And also, standardization is a big issue. For example, if you want a European-wide network, then you really have to have a look that all the tracks are the same, that they are standardized, that every Hyperloop every capsule can go on every track in every country.
And from an economic point of view, what do you think would be the main benefits of implementing Hyperloop in the future?
Well, I think it would make the world smaller, because think of it. You could, for example, work here in Munich, but live in Berlin or something like that, because it's just half an hour of travel or something like that. So it would have a huge impact of your whole life. And also, I think a lot of people want to travel. They want, also, especially our generation or something like that. They really want. They have the wish for traveling. Often traveling fast, something like that. But of course, traveling with the plane is not very environmentally friendly. And with the Hyperloop, it would be a really good alternative, a very sustainable alternative for the future.
Hyperloop is not the first time that humans have taken a stab at traveling at the speed of sound. The Concorde was for many years the super fast and super luxurious way of travel across the Atlantic, at least. But of course, it was very expensive. What do you think needs to happen to make Hyperloop affordable so that it actually becomes just another public transport?
So yeah, I think like Edith was saying, one of the main aspects is the economic aspect, because you have the whole infrastructure for Hyperloop, which is quite costly, and also to think where to start building the Hyperloop. I mean, is it in Europe? Is it maybe in Asia, where maybe you don't have still the cities and it's easier to start a network there? And also think about how to start. Is it more for passengers, or is it maybe easier to start with cargo? So I think these are questions that need to be answered for that.
Yeah. And if the urge to travel hopefully resumes and we're free to move at some point in the future, and hopefully with Hyperloop, how do you think passenger networks might look like in the future when it becomes implemented at large scale, when thinking about the overland travel, but also then the dense populated city areas?
I think it really depends. For example, if you consider the USA, where you have vast areas where there's basically nothing, and they don't have that much public transport available as we have here, there it will look completely different, where there it will be more or less point-to-point connections, whereas in Europe, we have a highly dense public transport system, which can be both an advantage or a disadvantage. I think there will be more competition, so it really needs to be affordable and economically feasible that it will come to Europe. But then on the other side, it can also be a benefit that we already have infrastructure. So as Iris said, we might use existing subway stations or whatever infrastructure we have, and then we can just integrate it in there. So it really depends where in the world this Hyperloop concept will be.
It's difficult to get very definitive and yes and no answers with Hyperloop. But if we take the economic and the technical scalability into consideration, what's your best guess of where a Hyperloop track and where the first Hyperloop might be built, and what do you think will it look like, and what might it transport?
Well, I think when I had to guess, I wouldn't say that it would be in Europe or in Germany or something like that. In Germany, especially not in Germany, because of the whole bureaucracy, something like that. When I had to guess, I would say, for example, a track between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, for example. They were already considering that. It would be a point-to-point connection, so it wouldn't be so complicated, so huge, and I think for the beginning it would be really nice. Also, there is not so many infrastructure. Actually, there's just desert between them. So I think implementing a infrastructure there would not be such a huge effort, basically.
Okay. Do you guys agree, or would you have a different opinion, different thought on where a first Hyperloop might be built?
I think I'll agree with her. I think the first Hyperloop will be somewhere where it's just a point-to-point connection, because that's just much easier. And as Iris said, in Europe, we have a highly dense network of public transport, as we mentioned before. And I think there it would be really difficult. And first, everything needs to be standardized. Otherwise, then Germany will have another Hyperloop standard than Switzerland, for example, and then it wouldn't work at all. So I think it's easier to start somewhere where you don't have that much infrastructure yet, and just can start from the ground up.
Okay. And to get to this point, we did talk a lot about open source development and the advantages of that with all of its stakeholders, universities, companies, investors, governments. What do you guys think needs to happen in this system between these stakeholders for this technology to become reality?
I think the European Hyperloop Week was a really great start because first we had this Hyperloop SpaceX competition, and there it was really a competition and just who is the fastest, and the fastest team will win. Whereas now we have the Hyperloop Week, and it's also part of it is also a competition so that you can showcase your prototypes and everything, but it's also really important to get to know each other, and that's actually where we met each other before. So it's really an exchange of ideas and helping each other to find common grounds and find solutions together, and not just that it's teams working on their own against each other, because I think we really need all to work together to get this to this point that we can have a Hyperloop.
And yeah, I also think it's also a lot of support that is needed there. For example, support from the government. I mean, we saw, for example, the example of the Transrapid, how important this is to make this possible, as well as financial support from investors, for example. That they have patience for that and can help to make this happen.
And how far away do you think these kind of next steps are of kind of governments, investors, or other companies coming into the system and to be able to take these kind of next steps that we need to take?
Well, of course, that's always hard to estimate, but I think, yeah, when we say we just have a point-to-point connection or something like that, not such a huge complicated track or something like that, I could imagine that in the next 5 to 10 years or something like that, there might be at first, at least the first, huge prototype of it or something like that. Maybe also talking about what will be transported there. Maybe it would make sense to first start not with passengers, but maybe just with logistics, so like cargo or something like that, because then you don't have to consider the safety, well, but not so much, and so it would be just easier to implement it. So I could imagine that in the next 10 years and something like that, that you have some kind of these connections for logistic.
Okay. Many people regard Hyperloop as just another crazy idea of Elon Musk. So I want to start kind of closing this panel by asking each one of you the question of whether or not you think that it's just another crazy idea by Mr. Musk, or whether or not you think that it can really become a reality and the fifth mode of transportation.
I think it is a crazy idea, but it's not just a crazy idea, because it has potential. And I also think sometimes we need to have crazy ideas to get further. And I really think it has potential, especially for cargo. It can be implemented in the next few years. I think without too much change of infrastructure. For persons, I think it will take much longer, because as we heard before from Sofia, there's no kind of standards and stuff like that. So I think that will take a lot of time, especially in Europe, where we have very strict guidelines and standards that need to be met so that it is safe for human transport.
Sofia, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I also agree. It's of course a crazy idea. I mean, you are in a vacuum tube traveling with your vehicle, but yeah, I think it's one of these crazy ideas that is worth trying it, and I think it might be real if everybody works for it and you get the support that we were just mentioning, and everybody helps each other. So I do think this might be possible in some years.
Iris?
And well, I don't think it's such a crazy idea. I think that the vacuum transport and also the magnetic levitation, they really have a high potential. And even if there's not a proper Hyperloop in the next 30 years or something like that, I think those technologies are very, very important to do research on. So I don't think it's a crazy idea. It's just really helpful to motivate people to do research in these technologies and make the future more sustainable and faster.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think they are perfect closing words. Thank you everybody for listening. Big thanks to Iris, Sofia and Rahel. Sorry that Puk couldn't be here today with us. Thank you guys for giving us a small glimpse at the future of mobility. And I think I speak for everybody when I say that I'm personally quite excited about Hyperloop as potentially our new fifth mode of transportation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.